Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode 7 of the Fair Housing Insiders. Today's episode is going to focus on fair housing and social media. We tried to put both topics, marketing, advertising, and / social media into episode 6, but there was so much content we decided to split them into 2. So we look forward to a hybrid of the conversation, a little bit of a crossover from episode 6, but we're confident you're going to enjoy all of the feedback and comments that Kathy and I had in this particular episode. So just as a reminder that this show is to specifically address some fair housing questions that have come up, and we look forward to your participation on the show and your feedback. Remember, our comments are recommendations, and they are not legal advice. It is always good to confer with legal counsel. So thanks for being here today, and let's get into our show. So let's talk about Facebook for a minute, that particular case, and build that into the overall what we're seeing out there. So I have a few thoughts. I review property management social media channels daily. They're in my feed on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. Over 10 years ago, I made this statement, and I'm still making the statement today. Your pool is beautiful. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt about it.
It's a great pool.
It's a great pool. It's a great view. Here we are right now, Kathy, in the current climate, even more limited opportunities for in-person interactions with our communities. The in-person tour right now is more challenging. Virtual tours are really taking off. They were already have been in place for some time. More property management companies are jumping on board. So this is the time, even in this conversation, property management companies are looking at more ways to showcase their communities on a virtual level. So when we think about what the Facebook case is, and then what you and I were chatting about when we were preparing for this show, we've used the word balance a couple of times. So if a property management company is very consistent in their use of different situations, people from different ethnic backgrounds, people from different familial statuses in their artwork that they use, and consistently have that approach that no matter what they're doing with their media, that they are being inclusive of all of these protected categories. Does that not provide for them a solid basis that their advertising, their marketing is in line with the Fair Housing Act? That was a very long question. So what are your thoughts?
So I think your very long question, Jonathan, deserves a very long answer, which I am very capable of providing those really long answers. I would say that I like to take this back to where it started with fair housing concerns. And as with many issues, the pendulum swings too far. And so what started out as the concept of let's not have pictures in your leasing offices. Let's not have pictures on your websites. Let's not have pictures in your brochures that only show white people and only show people doing active things like swimming and running and playing tennis. And that's the only pictures you have. That would be what we would say is very unbalanced in marketing to a diverse community. So that's where the concern started, because that was very common. That was more often than not. And I'll give you an example. And this was many years ago. I walked into one of my clients' leasing offices, and they prided themselves on being a very active community. They had all kinds of social activities and outings and had their residents to the clubhouse all the time. And they were very proud of that. They did a great job. And so they took pictures, and then they hung them in the office, all around the office in the walls, so that when people came in the office, they could see themselves, or they could see that if they lived here, they would be part of this very fun, social, active community. And they spent a lot of money framing those pictures. And I walked in and looked around and thought to myself, this would be a fun place to live, but everyone that lives here is white. Right. And it seems to me like they're advertising to white people. And that is the concern. So if that's the concern, how do we get to a more balanced approach? Well, if all your residents are white for whatever reason, and I'm not, we aren't assuming that if that's the case, that's because of discrimination. Sometimes that's just because of a lot of reasons that are not illegal. If that's the case, you cannot just show pictures of your residents. You're going to have to hire some models to go be in an apartment or out on the picnic grounds and take pictures of them and put that up there too. On your brochures, you're going to have to make sure that you get pictures of residents of several races and nationalities, and that some of your pictures are of residents or, again, models that are disabled. And it doesn't have to be in every single picture. That would be overwhelming, obviously. Right. But let's take a view of marketing activities, again, in every area, and let's look at them over a 6-month or a year period. And let's just make sure that in that time frame, we've got a diverse community that we are suggesting will want to live here in this property. And that's the goal. It doesn't have to be an extreme so that you don't show any residents if you can't show one of everybody. A black person, a white person, an Asian person, a Hispanic person, a person in a wheelchair, children, old people. You don't have to get all of those folks in every picture, right. But why can't you have some pictures with all those folks in over a 6-month or a year period of time? Right. If you can accomplish that, then you are doing diverse marketing. And that should be the goal, not to take out people from your marketing. I think a lot of people reacted to those old cases about only showing white people by taking all people out of their marketing activities. And that, again, that's an extreme. You really don't have to do that to still comply with the law. Right. That's awesome. So take that. Let's pause and let that sink in for everyone listening and watching this show today. There's so many ways that we can organize things. And you touched on so many different things, Kathy, that I looked at, as the marketing guy. What are some fundamentals that I have taught people to keep themselves just organized about their content marketing? So there's no reason why everything that you just said cannot be put into some sort of organized format within your content project plan. That if it's a column, if it's a checklist, however you work with your team to develop your content, that inclusiveness, as you've so eloquently kind of put it for us,
should be part of that process, and make it easier for your site team. So property management companies all have a different approach on who handles marketing for them. Sometimes it is the site team that is responsible for their Facebook page or their Instagram account. But the marketing department still has that obligation to kind of create that legal folder. I don't know if that's the right expression or not, but don't make it so difficult on your site teams that they are just, well, we're going to default to the pool again. So we have to put an Instagram post out today because corporate says it's Friday and it's time to put an Instagram post out. Well, I don't want to get in trouble with fair housing, so look at the beautiful sign in front of the property. And so that's what happens. It's like they just go into this default mode. So it's really important from a marketing department standpoint to think forward, kind of have that content plan in an organized fashion so that when it comes to your social media content program, that you are regularly changing things up when it comes to your overall social media. So let's just swing back for a second. We've mentioned the Facebook case a couple of times. And when we were talking and preparing for the show, there was a couple of items that came up in that conversation. And again, this is, I think in the context of this, it's one of those items that we watch what fair housing testers, what fair housing organizations, what they seem to be paying attention to. This puts an intriguing responsibility on the marketing department from the perspective of when they're making their ads, what are they targeting within those ads? So what was your take, Kathy? Let's just take a couple of minutes and dive into that. When you saw that Facebook case come up about a year ago, what were the red flags? What were your first thoughts? Any comments specifically about what the marketing departments in property management need to think about?
Well, for anyone that's not very familiar with it, what happened last year was HUD had been investigating Facebook for what we've gotten pretty well to understand is Facebook's practices of data mining.
You're right.
So Facebook pulls together all of our likes and dislikes when we're on Facebook and keeps records of all that and pulls that together in algorithms.
Yeah.
And that term has gotten to be popular.
Oh, yeah.
In a number of fair housing cases. And with Facebook, it's about target marketing. And target marketing is when you select the group of people that you want your advertisements to get to. Now, if that determination is based on protected categories, that would be illegal target marketing. So if you are trying to market something and get to Christians, and Christians predominantly, that would be illegal advertising because of the target market you're going to is a protected category.
Right.
So if you're trying to get to smokers versus non-smokers, that's not illegal because that's not a protected category. If you're trying to get to people based on their race, obviously it is.
Right.
But see, that extends a little farther than that, which also involve the Facebook algorithms, because sometimes zip codes can determine race, because in some areas we know that there are communities that are somewhat segregated by zip codes. So if we only advertise to this zip code, we're only advertising to white people or Hispanic people or any of the other protected categories. That would technically violate the Fair Housing Act. And that is what HUD is concerned and why it charged Facebook, because Facebook wouldn't agree to turn over its data to see how it decides all of this targeting, data mining. And so HUD couldn't decide whether Facebook was going to stop doing illegal target marketing for its customers. And that's why they charged them. Now, we haven't heard anything about that case. We don't know what's happening. That case could easily settle tomorrow for all we know. I kind of doubt that it'll end up in court, but we'll have to see whether that happens or not. And if it settles, we will never know the outcome, probably. We will not know exactly what Facebook has agreed to do, but I think we can count, if it settles, on the fact that property management companies that continue to use Facebook to market, hopefully can count on the fact that they aren't going to automatically get themselves in trouble by doing that. Whereas right now, not only Facebook could be held accountable for target marketing, but so could its customers that use its algorithms to accomplish that target marketing.
Right. So it's interesting. It's one of those cases that, yeah, like you said, we need to really pay attention to and to watch. And from the time that Facebook case came out and even till today, Facebook, Google, any of those advertising type pay-per-click campaigns or anything along that line. I'm losing my thought for a second. Sorry about that. But they have made those changes, and it was always a red flag to me when I first kind of reviewed like what's available if I wanted to put together an ad campaign. For many items, it makes sense. Of course, you want to be able to target certain things when you are advertising retail products, vacation destinations, and the list is on and on. Advertising is just the way things work. So it's always been interesting to me. It's like, okay, well, how does Facebook, Google, and any of these other platforms, how do they accommodate for the Fair Housing Act, and how do property management companies have to put themselves in that position that when they are making those campaigns, that they are not targeting certain groups of people that would be considered a violation of the Fair Housing Act? Because to your point, right now, yeah, there may not be a whole lot of conversation out there about it. However, all those items are records. So again, this is not a fearful thing. It's just it's a cultural thing when it comes to the Fair Housing Act, whether it's our posters, whether it's our social media, and whether it's, behind the scenes when we're making these ads. We want to make sure that we're in compliance with the Fair Housing Act. And really, I love the overall balance of just how, as a company, everyone needs to kind of embrace that and look for those opportunities to really showcase the spirit of your property management company and the spirit behind your community, and with some creativity, that all-inclusive approach can really bolster that overall image. So yeah, great feedback, Kathy. So I think the last item that has come up in conversation, we switch over to various housing markets. So with certain words and phrases, can you just touch on, like, for example, student housing? Is there a little bit of a difference for those who are in the student housing sector for certain words or phrases that they can or cannot use? What are your thoughts?
There are, and I can't say we know how extensive this is, but there's a general view, and this has always been around. It's not part of the law, but there's a general view that when you share living spaces, such as roommates, that there are some flexibilities, especially about gender. So if you're going to rent a bedroom in your house, and normally you absolutely could not advertise, for rent room for a female, that under most circumstances would be illegal unless you have a shared living environment.
Right.
And if you do, then you can discriminate, if you will, in the way you market based on gender. What is, I think, not quite as clear is whether that also would include gender identity, sexual orientation, in those areas where that is a protected category. I can't say I'd be comfortable either way, but I think there is much more of a flexibility with shared living spaces. So that's one area where advertising might, and the requirements might be a little different.
Right.
The second very large area is with housing for older persons, which is what it's called under the Fair Housing Act, and what we think of as retirement home living, senior properties, and probably the most common is called 55 and older properties. And in those communities, they absolutely can have statements in their advertisement restricting children in any way they choose to. So that would be a huge exception that you also see quite a bit when you're out and about looking at housing advertisements.
Very good. Okay, good. So just a lot of context. So what an amazing show, Kathy. So I'm looking through some of my notes here, thinking of a lot of the things that you said. So many takeaways. Here are my takeaways. And I'd like to get a couple of your key takeaways before we close it out. So for me, it's the marketing department, the legal department. You got to come together and make it easier. I think one of the other pain points I hear from some clients is how long it takes anything to get approved. What can be done to shorten that cycle, have better communication, make it easier for your marketing department, and make it easier for your on-site teams who are involved in your social media program to really help showcase the community and not be so afraid of what they can't show. So increase the communication. Look for that resource, everyone. We're going to share that with you of some words and phrases to think about what you can and cannot use. That'll be in the show notes. And really just have an organized content plan so that you are demonstrating how inclusive you are of all of the protected federal and state classes. Kathy, what are your takeaways?
Actually, Jonathan, I think we need to talk about one more topic.
Okay.
And that is a topic that I'm not all that comfortable with, but I know you are, and I am so grateful to you that you are. And that's just the general concept of using social media. Sometimes staff people are assigned to snap away, take videos on their phone, and then upload them and put them on their social media sites. And, one issue is that okay to do that? And is that a smart, method of advertising? And if staff are doing that, if leasing agents, if managers, property managers are doing that, what are the issues that they should be thinking about while they're doing that? And I can't even list all the social media sites because I don't know too much about them, but you sure do. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, no, it's an excellent question. And so that kind of circles back to a couple of my original statements and just how much are you giving those options to your site team, or do you have a rigid policy? Look at episode number 5 as we've talked about policies and procedures. So what I see missing, and in my training classes, Kathy, and we talk about this from a fair housing perspective as well, is just the site team. So the site team has an enormous opportunity to really showcase their personality. When there's so many reviews that are out there, often, yes, it's beautiful amenities, what a beautiful property, but 90% of the reviews are about the people who actually work there. So if you're looking for content that is going to be fair housing compliant, why not use yourself? Why not use your maintenance team and have that conversation and see if that can be included in your marketing program? And that way people are getting a sense of the community, because now that you're showcasing not the residents in this case, but you're showcasing the people that the residents interact with. And you can't get anything safer than that when it comes to, well, is this going to be compliant with the Fair Housing Act? The other thing you have to keep in mind from a social media standpoint is, and you mentioned it earlier, is within the lease agreement, make sure that there's some sort of a model release if you are going to take pictures of some sort of a community event. Now, that may not be as relevant in the context of where we are today, but in general, common areas within that lease agreement have some sort of a disclaimer saying that there's a model release that if you're in the common area, you may be used in marketing footage. So those are some items to really to keep in mind. But this is an opportunity to really showcase how fun and what a great community that you have to live in, a fun community, one that is really going to connect the resident to the staff members. So yeah, that's my thoughts, Kathy. I don't know if that covered your question or not, but just really.
Yeah,
go ahead.
One thing I worry about with social media is there are some really nasty people out there who will go on a website or go on a Facebook site and say some really horrible things. And what happens with those kind of posts? Because if those stay there, that gives a impression that this is a community full of anger or fear or harassment and discrimination. So I remember moving into an apartment one time and going on one of the social media sites, and I saw a number of those posts, and my thought was, I don't want to live there if that's the kind of people that live at that place.
Right. Okay. Thank you. That's what an amazing question. So a few years ago, the average response time was sometimes days when it came to, like, for instance, responding to a review. That is no longer and has not been acceptable for some time now. The same goes with if you have turned the options on that your community, your digital community, can interact with your social channels, whether they tag your property page or your Instagram account, anything along that line, you have to have notifications in place that someone is going to respond to that as soon as possible. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with having overall guidelines for your community that allow to say, you know what, that is not acceptable. And you state that, you make that statement, maybe take a screenshot and you say, I am deleting this comment because your comment is not in conjunction with the principles and the community spirit that we have. And so you really, really set the standard. But the idea is you cannot wait 24 hours to respond to those. Somebody needs to be really involved. And it's evolved, Kathy. It used to be the job title was the social media manager or the community social manager, or a few other descriptive items. It's really there. It's just the media. That's all it is. So we've come back to a different world of what public relations are. So they're all merged. Marketing, public relations, and Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, these are just the distribution outlets. That's all they are. It's not necessarily a social media department. So very, very critical to respond as quickly as possible. And that way you are keeping your community safe. And what's amazing with a lot of communities that I've worked with over the years, Kathy, is because they have such a solid social media presence, they wind up creating what are called brand ambassadors for their company, for their community. And it's just awesome to see people jump in that live at those properties and say, you know, we do not agree with that. What you're saying is incorrect. And oftentimes it's with other descriptive elements within the context of that conversation. But it really makes the property managers and the staff at those sites, it just warms their heart to see that they have people who really do love where they live and that they're ready to stand up to any ones who say anything that is discriminatory, defamatory, anything along that line. Yeah.
Well, that's good to know. And I think what I'm hearing you say is if you're going to be out there in the social media world, you've got to take it pretty seriously and actively be participating constantly, because as we all know, some of us from personal experiences, a lot of damage can be done out there in social media. But again, as we've said earlier, that fact alone should not keep companies from using it. They just have to use it effectively and successfully, and not just throw it out there and then just leave it alone, because sometimes what happens is not a positive thing, is not any type of marketing. It's almost the opposite. And so it's good to know that there's some controls that can be used to prevent that from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just being in touch with everything. Like you've made a lot of comments. We've referenced how everything is changing so quickly. Words and phrases are changing. The English language is changing. The overall culture that we deal with is changing. Now we're dealing with a much more a funneled approach to a virtual how we showcase our communities. And so this has been an amazing episode to really, let's get rid of the fears and really bring the Fair Housing Act, the culture, the essence, the principles, the law into what we're doing and show to our residents and to our prospects that we embrace the essence of the Fair Housing Act. So yeah, excellent questions, Kathy. Thank you for turning it back on me for a second there. That was great. So, and we're great show. Any other couple quick takeaways to share with the audience before we close out? Again, going back to those social media posts, I think as long as someone is looking at them over a period of time, and that if they are off balance, we talked about balance earlier, that they take proactive steps to put them back in balance by making sure that they are showing a diverse community and covering the various protective categories, because they might not have been covered just in kind of those Instagram shots. Right.
And if they're not, there are ways of going back and putting things in balance. consciously, not just by happenstance, but consciously. And that's, I think, the way to maintain balance over every year. Let's say maybe there's a marketing review and things are made sure that they're kept in balance over that time.
Right. Very good. Very good. Well, we want to give a big shout out to our community who have subscribed to our YouTube page, who have liked our episodes so far. We really appreciate your support of this project that we're involved in to provide valuable, insightful thoughts on the Fair Housing Act and some specific ways that you can make adjustments within your organization today. So if you haven't done so already, take a moment and subscribe to our YouTube account. Please give us a thumbs up if you've appreciated this material today. This is episode number 6, Marketing and Advertising and how it relates to the Fair Housing Act. Kathy, thank you so much for, as always, just amazing thoughts and insightful perspective to share with our audience today.
Great to be with you, Jonathan.
All right, everyone. We'll see you next time. Take care.